Welcome to the Vikings Now. I am your host, Patrick Seatman. And on today's show, we're going to be diving into the latest around the defensive coordinator search, kind of going over some interviews the Vikings have already had and some upcoming interviews that the Vikings do have slated so far. And then also, you guys are going to stick around for the second half of today's video. Who the Minnesota Vikings should draft. There's been a lot of talk of receiver, even quarterback, and we'll touch on a certain quarterback from the University of Florida that's been thrown out there a lot, Anthony Richardson, and if the Vikings should draft him, kind of be the succession plan for Kirk Cousins. But first, let's start off with the defensive coordinator interviews. First up on the list, it is Ryan Nielsen from the New Orleans Saints. He just had his interview this past week with the Minnesota Vikings, and they completed it. Right now, Ryan Nielsen, he's the co-defensive coordinator and also the defensive line coach for the New Orleans Saints. He interviewed with the Vikings earlier this week, and overall, Ryan Nielsen, he's done great work with the Saints defensive line. I always feel like every single year it's either a guy like Cam Jordan or whoever it may be. The Saints always have a great front seven. If you look at the Saints stats from this past season, a down year for the New Orleans Saints, but defensively, they were able still to put up really, really good numbers. Points per game, still top 10. Overall yards per game, in the top 5. Rush yards per game, obviously lower there at 24th overall. But pass yards, second in the league. This guy is able to turn around a defense just like he did in New Orleans. I think he could do the same thing in Minnesota, and that's why I'm all in on a guy like Ryan Nielsen. He's a young guy. He's 43 years old. He's a young, creative, defensive mind, and I think he would fit in really, really well with Kevin O'Connell and this coaching staff. The Vikings, with Wes Phillips, with Kevin O'Connell, they got a bunch of young defensive minds and offensive minds on that coaching staff. I think Ryan Nielsen would fit right in because if you remember, a guy like Ed Donatell, an older defensive coordinator, you saw that disconnect between Kevin O'Connell and Ed Donatell. We all know the infamous picture kind of been thrown around after the Giants game. Kevin O'Connell has just given Ed Donatell a death stare middle of the game. I don't think that will happen with a guy like Ryan Nielsen, so I'm kind of all in on him. If there isn't going to be Brian Flores, I would want Ryan Nielsen as the Vikings' next defensive coordinator. But guys, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel because when the Vikings do pick up their next defensive coordinator, we're going to have a video coming out to you guys ASAP. And overall, just any offseason Vikings news, rumors, and whatever it may be, especially around the NFL draft and NFL free agency, we will have you guys covered. Go right down there, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Really helps me out here. We're trying to get this channel to 11,000 subs. Go hit that subscribe button. Now, the second interview that the Minnesota Vikings have already completed, and they actually completed this when you guys are seeing this yesterday, Sean Desai. Sean Desai has kind of been the hot defensive coordinator name thrown out there for other teams such as the Dolphins. He was interviewing with the Browns before they ended up going with Jim Schwartz. But he actually interviewed with the Vikings last offseason. I know. Could you imagine if we would have went with this guy instead of Ed Donatell? Maybe the Minnesota Vikings could still be playing football right now. But he completed his interview with the Vikings this week, and he's currently the associate head coach and the defensive assistant for the Seattle Seahawks. Now, Sean Desai, he's only 39 years old, and in 2011, he was assistant director of football operations at the University of Miami. He spent a lot of time with the Chicago Bears. He actually was Vic Fangio's right-hand man back in 2018 when the Bears had one of the best defenses of, frankly, all time. When they had guys like Khalil Mack and the boys going, he was Vic Fangio's right-hand man. And then currently, like I said, he's associate head coach and defensive assistant for the Seattle Seahawks. But out of just those two, I want to know what you guys have to say. If you had to pick out of the kind of young gun defensive coordinators that the Vikings could be looking to pick up, are you going with Ryan Nielsen, type RN? And if you're going with Sean Desai, type SD, I'm going to make this the pinned comment on today's video. So if an ad break comes, take advantage of it. Get down in the comments and let me know your thoughts below. Now, Brian Flores. Brian Flores is set to interview with the Vikings. They have not come out with a certain date for that interview so far. But I think if you have a chance to go get Brian Flores, even with these young guys such as Neilsen and Desai, Flores is still my top choice. I still think it's got to be Brian Flores as the guy that you bring into the building. And I love what I've looked into on a guy like Ryan Nielsen and Sean Desai. But I think Flores would be a great addition. Bring that veteran presence to, like I said, a younger coaching staff, which the Vikings have. So maybe asking, why Flores? Like I said, I think he's a great defensive mind. He does run a 3-4 front. So the Vikings, obviously with Zimmer, they ran that 4-3. But this past year with Donatello, they did run that 3-4. He blitzes a lot. He's got some great blitz packages, very different than Ed Donatello in the way he runs his 3-4. And with Brian Flores, he's always been good at stopping the run, and which is huge. It felt like the Vikings can never get a stop in those key third and shorts this year. It would always be an easy push for the opposing team's offensive line. So he's always had really strong run-stopping sets. And I think this would be the aggressive choice. I think this would be the choice if us Vikings fans, we looked at our phone and we saw, oh, wow, the Vikings are signing Brian Flores to be their next defensive corner. That's the aggressive choice. I would love to have Brian Flores. He is my number one choice. But what say you guys? Who is your number one choice to become the Vikings' next defensive coordinator? Is it Ryan Nielsen, Sean Desai, or is it Brian Flores? You let me know down in the comments. And I will say this, Mike Pettine, about 15 minutes ago, we just got word that he's going to be also interviewing for that defensive coordinator spot. He was on the Vikings staff last year. So Mike Pettine, similar to that Donatello, I'm kind of hoping he's not the one that gets it. Mine's Brian Flores, but let me know your number one choice for defensive coordinator. We got to talk about it. This has been floating around on Vikings Twitter a ton. Draft a quarterback in round 1. Should the Minnesota Vikings consider drafting Florida quarterback Anthony Richardson if he falls in this year's draft? The Vikings are selecting 23 right now. I would never want to trade up for a guy like Anthony Richardson, but if you're sitting there at 23 and you see Anthony Richardson's name still on the board, should the Vikings do it? Looking at his passing stats from this past year, completion percentage, that's got to be the first thing that jumps out to you guys. Only at 53.8. Just over 2,500 yards and not even a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. You might be looking at those numbers being like, hell no, I don't want to take a guy like Anthony Richardson in round 1. But looking at his rushing stats right here, he is a lethal weapon in the run game. 103 carries, 654 yards, about 6.3 yards per carry with 9 rushing touchdowns this past season. And I think this goes back to the big old question with Kirk Cousins and why I think the Vikings should be considering taking Anthony Richardson in round 1. How far can you go? How far can you go as a team with Kirk Cousins as your leader, as your quarterback? You can have all the weapons you can. You can have a great defense. But how far can you go with Kirk Cousins as your quarterback? I'll have more to say about this in a second, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. Do you guys think it's a Super Bowl, NFC Championship game? Maybe it's just the divisional. Maybe you think Kirk has hit his peak and he can only take a team to the divisional round of the playoffs. Let me know in the comments below, how far do you think the Vikings can go with Kirk Cousins? Overall, I think Kirk Cousins, we saw it with Nick Foles, and we're seeing it with Brock Purdy right now. I think Kirk can obviously be a quarterback that you can go win the Super Bowl with. But Kirk can't be the reason you win the Super Bowl. He's not going to be the quarterback like a Josh Allen, Mahomes, or Burrow, where he puts the team on his back and he's the reason that you guys go win the Super Bowl. He can be a game manager. He can control the script of the game, and he can be great. Because this past year, he put up some pretty good numbers and leading this Vikings team to a 13-win season. Just over 4,500 yards, a 29-14 touchdown interception ratio with a quarterback rating just over 90. I think Kirk Cousins, I think he still can be a quarterback with the Vikings who can lead them far in the playoffs, but I don't think he can be the reason why the Vikings go far in the playoffs. So here's my ideal plan for the quarterback of the future. Let's just say you are sitting at 23 and you have Anthony Richardson right there, who I think he is a guy where he is going to need to sit behind a quarterback like Kirk Cousins. And I think the Vikings have an ideal situation for him. Kirk's got one more year of his contract left. You ride that out with Kirk and have Richardson develop behind him this next year, and I think it could really work out well for the Vikings in the long run, because my overall quick analysis of a guy like Anthony Richardson, he can read the defense pretty well. It's just his form and his base and his mechanics are all a little off. If you could get him in with a quarterback coach and fix all that, this is still a guy who's 6'5", 250, runs a sub 4.5 40. He is a freak athlete, a little Cam Newton-esque. I mean, the comparisons to Josh Allen, they've seen some Malik Willis, a couple of these guys. If he gets the throwing aspect of his game down, I think Anthony Richardson could be a gem in this year's NFL draft. But thank you guys so much for watching today's video. If you guys made it to the end, you guys are a real one as always. I love hopping in the comments, responding to you guys. So if you guys made it to the end, type real one down below. And hey, let me know what you guys have to say about drafting Anthony Richardson. And as always, Skol Vikes.